Hello and welcome to The Creative Experience. My name is Derek Hunt and I'm a professional glass artist, and I interview fellow artists to showcase their work to bring you the very best in what's happening now with glass across the globe. I interview artists from a wide variety of backgrounds. Some of them are at the beginning of their careers. They've just been working with glass for maybe 5 or 6 years. Others have got an international reputation and an award-winning portfolio of glass in a variety of formats. All of them have one thing in common. They're producing beautiful, innovative and exciting new glass, and I'm here to elevate that and showcase it to you as a way of inspiring the next generation and developing a community of fellow creatives. If you find value in this, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because I create videos on a very regular basis. And so today it is my great pleasure to introduce and bring to your attention John Kenneth Clark. John Clark, as I know him, is a Scottish glass artist who is now based in Germany. When I was at art school, I was already aware of John's work. He was based up in Glasgow at that time and doing tremendous work in a very recognisable style. He is a glass artist in the sense that he is an experimenter. He's always pushing the boundaries. He does traditional stained glass like this. These are examples of a large glazing scheme in Shanghai that he did with the Derek studio, but he also experiments with fused glass and slumped glass and cast glass, and he is an arts and crafts artist in the traditional sense. What I mean by that is he designs and makes the vast majority of his work. He's very hands-on and he loves to experiment. I really love his work. It's very recognizable. He is an absolute master artist, a master craftsman. He has skills that very few of us now possess in terms of acid etching skills, etc., and he uses them to great effect. So it was a real pleasure to hook up with him and have a moment to connect with him. So hopefully you're going to enjoy this interview. Sit back, relax and enjoy. Hi John, how are you doing?
Good, Derek. Nice to see you. It's been a while.
It's been a while. I think I first saw you back at Derek Studios in 2010, something like that.
I think I was working on the Glenmorangie project at that time.
You were doing this fantastic sculptural piece, and I was watching you working as well, which was brilliant with sculptural glass, and you were living in Wiesbaden, I think, at the time, weren't you? But you've subsequently moved to you're somewhere new now?
I'm not so far away. I've moved several times. I was in Wiesbaden, which is quite close to the Derek studio, okay? And then I moved a bit further away in Wiesbaden, almost in Biebrich, which was a bit further away. Then I moved to Mainz, which is across the river. And now I've moved along the river to a place called Bacharach, which is a little village. It's a village on the Rhine. And I live in a village up above Bacharach, you know. But it's still, if I go down to the river now, I can cross a ferry over the Rhine, and then I drive through a nice valley and I get to Derek's. So it's not much different.
Well, I googled your location. I couldn't believe how beautiful it looked. I mean, it's a gorgeous. Is it a town? It's not really a city, is it?
No, Bacharach is a little city. I mean, it used to be more popular, more touristy. It's an old town, basically. And what I've done is I've bought a view with a house.
Fantastic. I was so taken with Germany. I mean, I'd never really visited it before going to Derek Studios, and it's such a beautiful country. It's so varied, isn't it? You've got your sort of wine regions, and you've got your forests, and it really was a revelation. It's a lovely place to live.
You can go down to to Bavaria, where you've got the Alps. There's skiing down there. I mean, people have the wrong idea about it, basically, I remember when I was a kid, my brother had posters. He was learning German, and he had a couple of posters, and it was places like on the Rhine, Nierstein, and places like that. And I thought, my God, grapes grow there, I live in the middle of the wine growing area here,
Yeah, it's a lovely quality of life.
Yeah.
So listen, you're speaking obviously from home just now, and your studio is not at home, or do you do all your design work here, then take it to other studios to fabricate? Is that how it works?
What I've got, this house that I live in, the upper part is basically where I live, and it was 2 apartments basically. So I've got the upper part, which is with the terrace with the nice view and everything, and I do all my computer stuff up here. But downstairs I've turned it into like 3 smallish rooms. They're not huge rooms by any means, but I have a glass painting room in there. I've got a gas kiln that I've had for 30 odd years, one of the original ones. And I've since got a little fusing kiln that lets me do my fusing experiments in another room, and I've got another room that's like a drawing room, painting room, if I want to use it like that. So I do all my experimental stuff, designing everything I would do here or wherever I happen to be. And then over the years, most of the work I've done has been with Derek's. And that's why I always live kind of within striking distance. I was there for a while last week for an afternoon, but it's a good system, you know. I moved away from the doing all the making part of it a long time ago.
Yeah.
And realized that the system they use here with really well-trained people, you know what it's like, just worked very well for me for a long time.
I think it's a fantastic system, and it's really unique, I think, to the European studios where they accommodate artists arrive, and it's a little bit like going back to art school where you've got artists, an international collection of artists. You never know who you're going to meet, all sort of living under this one creative environment. It absolutely crackles with creativity and energy. It's it's Charlie's Chocolate Factory for artists, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've met everybody, and that's where I met you here, but you know, in the studio, and you know, Guy, I met in the studio, people from all over the world, you know, Narcissus, all of these guys, you know, I got Schreiter, Prinskin and Alec, all the people, you know, I met all the people at the studio, and you know what it's like. You sit down and have lunch. You don't really talk to each other during the day. You all have lunch together, and you all have a real laugh, and then you go back to work. You know?
I know, it's absolutely fabulous. I would encourage anybody who's watching this, if they ever get the opportunity to visit one of the studios, either Derek's or Peter's or Myers, it's an experience that they'll never forget. It really is worthwhile doing. So listen, let's just take this back to how you got involved with glass. You're a very experienced glass artist. You've worked internationally and you continue to work internationally. But how did the journey begin for you?
Well, I was in the Glasgow School of Art. Okay. It seems to have become an institution that was much harder to get into. In those days, I got accepted fine, based on a portfolio. I didn't actually study art at school. My beginnings were maths and computer programming, and I very quickly realized I was on the wrong track and I wasn't interested in this. And I'm very glad I didn't. Can you imagine trying to keep up with computer programming? But I was accepted for art school, and then I did my general first year, and I had no idea what I was going to do. You know, there was no intention of doing glass. And a friend of mine, who's had many incarnations and careers, was studying there at the time. I mean, he became a friend of mine there. And he was doing mosaic. And I looked at this thing and I thought, oh, I like the idea of that. I love the idea of permanence. I know lots of artists like things that break down and degrade and everything, but I've always loved the idea of permanence. You make things like, you see a Roman mosaic and you think, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I like the idea of things that last, you know. I saw this and I was looking for a department, and this was, in those days, that was called the Murals and Stained Glass Department. It has since become the Department of Environmental Art, I believe. It might have changed its name again. And I got accepted to that department, and I started working with mosaic. And then the glass lecturer, teacher there was a lovely man called Alfredo Abella. And he said to me after a month or so, why don't you try some glass, son? He was Italian, right? But he lived in Scotland about a long time. And I hadn't really thought about it. And, you know, maybe it was the same for you, but that first experience of cutting a long curve in glass, tapping it and breaking it, I don't know how many times I slipped my thumb open running my finger along the cut, you know, and I became kind of fascinated by it. And I had an absolute aptitude for it, you know. I mean, I've taught people how to do this, you know, but you know, I got it within the first window. My second window was a commission. My third window got sold immediately. You know, my main window for my degree show is in the Museum and Art Galleries in Kelvin Grove. You know, I did a deal with them when I was doing my master's, and it just became the thing to do. And so that the 4 years of my normal degree was then, was basically to do with design, cutting, and leading. But then I was offered a chance to do the Masters, which was a brand new course. It was another year and a half. And during that time, I figured out glass etching. And that was almost unknown. But you could etch Sangobian, blue and red. They're very soft. And so you could etch them with this acid. And so I was fascinated by acid work, you know. And that carried on. That's still probably the main method or the main technique that my work is associated with, you know. And so it started from there, Derek. And then I did a few commissions. Probably one of the earliest commissions, that's the most, in a sense, long-lasting one, was for the Cafe Gandolfi in Glasgow, which is a famous Glasgow cafe. That's right. And I mean, that was made in I made one part of that in 1984. So that was just a couple of years after graduating. And then I made a second part of that in 1987. And so they are kind of part of the Glasgow institution that is the Cafe Gandolfi, you know. And so that was how I really got moving.
And you have done a tremendous amount of work in Glasgow. I mean, Glasgow's really taken you to heart. There are so many projects in Glasgow. You and I used to joke about the fact that you've glazed most of Glasgow, I think, now in stained glass. All the big stuff's been done by you, including the cathedral. So and are you still returning to Scotland from time to time to do projects?
Well, I'm not at the moment. There was a couple of things I was looking at before COVID started. But everything just stopped. Everything stopped, you know. But that was a fascinating time where I was doing stuff, you know, like the Piping Centre, the Scottish Bagpiping Centre. I did something for the University of Strathclyde, a lovely set of windows for the cathedral. They were all within a concept. The big project I did in Glasgow early, and the reason when I started seriously working with Derek's was the complete Queen's Park Synagogue project.
Yes.
Which was, I mean, that took me 3 years. And, you know, that was a whole series of what I would call relatively small windows, like 5-foot windows, and then 2 big ones, you know, a big triptych and a half dome. And, you know, the first part of it, I still had a studio in Glasgow then, and I did the first part of it there. But I realized if I wanted to, the dome, the half dome that I was making was every single piece of glass was acid etched multiple times, right? And I realized I could not do that. I could not do that on my own. And I had already made one piece with the Derek Studio, and I just phoned them and said, I want to come and do this. And with Andrew, actually, the first part was arranged with Andrew. Andrew Moore,
yeah.
So the synagogue project really brought me into Germany, and then at one point I just decided to move to Germany. And because I was working in the studio, you know, for months at a time, every day.
And that synagogue project really started what has been a very long relationship with the Derek Studio. And it was an interesting arrangement because you had this wonderful kind of open studio policy where you could work often when other artists weren't working there, and you'd sort of arrive maybe later on in the afternoon and work through the evening and work into the night, yeah?
Yeah, because I think I was the only artist who was actually allowed to do his own etching. And that partly came about because I taught their people how to go with it, really how to work with etching at the beginning. You know, now these people are amazing, you know, like Rami and Olaf and Yela and all those people. But at the beginning, there was no way I could explain how to etch a piece, because etching for me is like painting. You're painting with the glass. You're looking and you're seeing it changing, you know, and you're saying, that's enough, stop, right, that's enough. I couldn't explain that, you know. And some of the most complicated, I mean, like when we were making the dome, I had the big studio that you know, the big one at the back. I had all the tables, and they were all covered in blue glass.
It was a takeover.
Entirely. And so we had all this blue glass. And I had a small team, and we were cutting all these Hebrew letters out, you know, to make this piece. And I remember Wilhelm coming home at 1 o'clock in the morning, and my whole team were there. with a big bottle of Sept, with a big bottle. We'd come from a party, and I said, I've got to finish this. So we all came back.
He's busy sweating, thinking of all the overtime he's got to pay everyone.
But it was crazy. I mean, it was lovely. It was a lovely experience. You know?
Fantastic. So you not only work, I know, just in Derek's studios, but you work internationally. And I'm really intrigued to hear about what has been quite a major project for you over the last few years, which is over in Kenya. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how that happened and the story behind that and what you've been actually working on?
Yeah, sure. I was invited to do a lecture at the RIAS, which is the Scottish Institute of Architects, in Dundee, and I think it was 2009. And the concept was making it abroad, and so that kind of worked on two levels with what I do, you know. And so I went there and I did my lecture, talked about the projects that I had made, the things I'd made, how I'd made them. And just after that finished, there was a coffee break, and this big man came up to me and he said, Scots guy, of course, now this sounds a bit crazy, I know, but I've been asked to build a cathedral in Kenya, and I'd like you to come and help me.
Well, you don't get asked that every day, do you?
I mean, just imagine you'd said, no, I can't do that. You know what I mean? So that becomes a life-changing moment. But there was the idea there's going to be glass. What the glass was, we didn't know. There was going to be this and this. We didn't know. But once we got the design proposal, then it started to come forward what was needed. And I mean, I'm actually editing a film of it, so it's all fresh in my mind at the moment. I'm working through 8 years of material, building a video of the whole story, the building and the artworks and the artists and everything, right? And so that sort of took over my life. But I decided, I was asked at one time, can we do this differently? During that time, I made the Glenmorangie project, which is glass fusing, which had interested me for a long time. But I did one project in Scotland, all slumped float glass. And this Glenmorangie project came up, and it was to be based on the signet that they use on their bottle comes from a Scottish Pictish stone, carved Pictish stone.
Yeah.
And so they asked, what would I do with that? And I looked at it and I said, well, the original, where it's coming from, is a relief sculpture. Let's make a relief sculpture, right? Yeah. And so that started me down this road of fusing. And then they had also said to me, can we do this in colour? Now, I had no idea how to do it in colour. That connected me to bullseye glass.
Yeah.
Right? And very, very interestingly, the owners of Bullseye Glass have a house nearby Glenmorangie, right? Lanny McGregor and Dan. And so Lanny and I, she was fascinated by what I had done there. She said, you know, most people start making a bowl. You start making a 2 meter, unbelievable, heavy sculpted window, you know. So it was a kind of use of a material that hadn't really started, you know. And they invited me, Bullseye invited me to go to the Northland studio and just play around with the stuff. The leader of the studio said to me, why don't you try glass casting? And I said, no, why don't you try casting a mold? I said, how do you do that? Because I had been, the Glenmorangie project, I had done all on a fiberboard, and it was all carved. It was all carved out, you know. If you saw that, you'll remember it was complicated.
Oh yeah, using craft knives and actually
filing it and sanding it, yeah.
And creating a sort of a relief mold into which you then slump the glass.
Directly.
Yeah.
So there was no casting process in between. Yeah. So that's what we did. So we did a series. I mean, the main glass works. I did a big window one end and a small window, all with bullseye glass. Although the big window, like a 5.5 meter window, was relief sculpted. It was more about putting the glass on the mold. When relief sculpted glass works at ground level, or when there's something happening behind it, okay, it doesn't work against the white sky, okay? And so that window doesn't work in the relief sculpted sense, but it works. I was putting the glass on the mold, putting sheet glass, thick sheet glass on top of it and fusing it. So instead of having lead lines and things, it was all done. I had been asked to do something different, and I certainly did something different.
Can I ask you perhaps to, and I think it's going to be quite a difficult decision, but to talk about perhaps three of your favorite projects that you've completed over the last few years, because there is quite a variety from traditional stained glass through to etched glass through to, I mean, there's a whole host of kind of sculptural pieces that you're working on as well. So what particular highlights would you like to share with us?
Okay. Well, I mean, there are a lot of projects, but one that does come to mind. I mean, the things we've already talked about, the lettering stuff. I mean, the Strathclyde one was really good, but there was a project I did, a Falklands War Memorial, and again, that was incredibly innovative in a sense. It was Andrew was involved in that project too, and it was in Reading, in Pangbourne. They built a special chapel for this, and the brief was, you know, it wasn't really wide open. It was a kind of a very interesting approach, and, you know, to try and kind of sum up that experience in some way. But one of the main themes was this idea of peace out of chaos, and you know, and so I ended up producing this idea that was all about, you know, because it was the thing I remember about it was this huge effort to transport all of these troops and materials and everything. It was all about transporting things over the sea, you know. And so the main part of this window is actually all about the sea. And I did it all with acid etching. The whole of the sea is just acid etched. And it's all these changing tones. It's a bit cubist. There's all these changing tones. And then there's a kind of, and the area of the Falklands brings up, the whole window was gridded, okay? So you got about 45 centimeter squares, and every piece was made as an individual piece, and every piece was etched multiple times, right, to get this quality. And then the landscape of the Falklands was done with a special glass that I had made, which was a kind of red-violet flashed on a turquoise. And that's been one of my favorite glasses over the years. And so the landscape was all etched out with that. And I think, and that one, in the landscape, I did a little bit of glass painting and I did a little bit of silver staining to define it. But it formed this cross within this blue, and it's all etched, and it's all, and that was amazingly technically difficult. I mean, which I like. I'm completely intrigued by the idea of glass fusing, okay? And a couple of years ago, when I was in Scotland, I had this idea in mind for a long time. Is there a relationship between music and colour? I want to scientifically base it. So I linked something. I linked the hertz frequencies in music and linked them to the terahertz frequencies on the spectrum. And so by doing that, I then established a system, so you can get the 12 notes.
A musical visual language.
Exactly. And I also, just because of my background in bagpipe music, working with the Bagpipe Centre, making stuff, they had asked me a while ago, can you think of anything new to do? And so I looked at one of these things as a piece of music, bagpipe music. And so bagpipe has only got 9 notes. So I gathered my 9 notes, and then I translated a piece of music called The Flowers of the Forest. And this amazing pattern popped out. I thought, does anybody know that? Is anybody aware of what happens visually, right? And so I sent it off to the Piping Centre. There were no reaction. I sent it off to Lanny at Bullseye. Within 2 hours, she invited me to go there and develop the system with Bullseye glass, which I then went over and spent a month doing.
But that's so scalable. I mean, now that you've kind of used the filter to sort of create visual interpretations of notes, that can be scaled to any musical form at all.
Anything. You know, I mean, I've done piano pieces. You can do orchestra. You can do anything.
Yeah. It's the potential is wonderful, because that's a sort of a new visual language, isn't it? It's a way of interpreting and tying in sound and vision in a really interesting way. I'm reminded a little bit of those wonderful shapes you see when sand is put on a reverberation board and a subwoofer is put underneath. You get these kind of visual manifestations of sound. And you're doing it with color.
Yeah, so it was very interesting to go to Bullseye and then to work with their material, and actually find a way. It's not making the colors is easy, but creating the octaves is the hard part. Right?
Yeah. How do you do that? How do you do that then? How do you separate the octaves?
I've figured it all out. Yeah, it's just with tone. Okay. But I mean, what was so beautiful in this? I actually, it took me 3 weeks actually to figure it out. And once I got it, then I created a kind of tonal sheet, working through a system. Created this tonal sheet. And what is amazing with glass, though, is that your starting note, if you were doing this with paint, everything would end up muddy and grey by the end, right? You see that in colour wheels when you try and paint them. With glass, it doesn't. The colour stays true in a way, right to the deepest tones. And that was fascinating. And then my problem became, how do you get the highest tones? And I did that a bit with sprinkling fruit and fusing it and getting much paler. And then, but I actually, once I had done my investigation, Lanny invited me to make a window for the house in Scotland with 4 bagpipe tunes. And so I did that. I did that across in Bullseye. And I did that. And I made it with 10,000 pieces of glass.
My God.
So that was fun.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, it's lovely when you kind of break new ground like that, because so often you see sort of the same kind of visual tropes being used again and again, and you seem to rejoice in a challenge of producing something new and kind of venturing into the unknown, which makes for the best art, the most exciting discoveries, really. So do you see yourself developing into other areas with glass? I mean, are there unexplored territories that you want to sort of investigate?
Not really. I mean, I'm not really interested. I did some things with a bit of spray painting, but that was really just black. I did things, very abstract pieces. I like the abstract pieces I was making. I did a project near Wiesbaden in a place called Domäne Mechtelshausen. And that was where I brought an abstract quality in, but an acid-etched quality in, that I really loved. And I did a few projects using that method.
Yeah.
It never really kicked off anywhere, but they were quite astonishingly beautiful, and that was experimenting within the medium. Okay, and I think fused glass is a totally unexplored area here. I think it's totally unexplored, and I'll quite happily spend the next 10 years working with that, as well as acid work. Acid work's so normal for me, So any glass work that I do, which needs to be etched, I'll figure out how to do it.
And when you say acid work, that's within the context of what we would call traditional stained glass. It's still within the matrix of a lead matrix.
It's using, I mean, the most beautiful glass to acid etch is Lambert's glass.
Yeah.
It allows you, I mean, Saint-Just make lovely glass too, but there's not very many colors. So that range of color that you could acid etch and create these beautiful transitional tones is dependent on Lambert's glass. So with Lambert's glass, you're restricted to the size you can use.
Yeah.
It was interesting. I remember when I was listening to your interview with Andrew. Andrew was talking about Patrick Heron. I remember being there and having lunch, with Patrick and seeing what he was doing, and that was wonderful and innovative. But I actually don't like the silicon approach.
Right.
I don't like gluing things with silicone. I think it will age, I think it will harden, and I think the pieces will fall off, right?
Yes, I know what you're saying.
Going back to my idea of permanency, I don't like it. And so I'm happy with fused glass.
Well, I think what is wonderful about your work, John, is that it's using glass as the medium. It's not trying to use another medium to fake glass, like screen printing, for example, or airbrushing. All wonderful mediums, and there are a lot of really exciting artists using those mediums. But you're going back to the mother. You're going back to the glass as and the quality and the refraction and the kind of texturizing of glass and the permanence of glass as well. I mean, when we make a stained glass window, it's laughable that people ask for sort of guarantees, because basically it'll be here. It'll be here in the 24th century. The glass that you're making now will be here for centuries to come, because it's made in it with techniques that are very much tried and tested. And I think that's what's wonderful.
But coming back to your point, I had a question from a church that we're looking at doing. can you give us a guarantee? I said, yeah, we'll give you, what, 10 years, 20 years, 25 years. I said, listen, the glass will be there long after the church falls down.
I know. I know. It's just a different metric, isn't it, with stained glass that you're dealing with? You're dealing with millennia. You're dealing with thousands of years. I mean, and the problem is that a lot of contemporary glass is put into buildings that have got a lifespan of 40 years. You know, you read about these wonderful projects that are done by Brian Clark, etc., in airport terminals, and it's torn down in 15 years because a new developer comes in and wants to kind of rebuild out the interior. So that sense of permanence has been lost, I think, with other techniques.
Sure. And there is also, there is that thing. I remember when I made the works for the synagogue in Glasgow, the synagogue closed within 15 years. The whole idea of the project was to try and save this lovely old synagogue. But it didn't work. But all the windows were actually under building regulations. You couldn't dispose of them.
Yeah.
And they all get taken into another synagogue except the dome. And but my thinking, even at that time as I was making those, I was thinking, these things will be seen, and they were kind of celebrated at that time, and then they've been forgotten, obviously. But I said, if they last long enough, then they'll be museum pieces, But the problem with huge projects, like what Brian and people have done, these huge things, once a new developer comes in and they don't have any understanding, they'll just throw them away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is a bit scarier, and it's such a shame.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a place in the world for that type of art, without doubt, and I think it's really exciting. There's a lot of breakthroughs happening in the kind of the cathedrals of of commerce. The shopping centres and places. That's where people congregate now. That's where people meet, and I think it's exciting, the art that's being created there. But the glass that you're working with, the fused glass and the stained glass, that is on a different level in terms of lifespan, expected lifespan, and also quality. I think the quality of light that comes through etched glass, that comes through fused glass, is really unique. There's no substitute.
I mean, you and I both do similar things. You're working with the material and what I still think of as the true sense. No, I don't care. If somebody comes and gives me a project to make something to last for 20 years, sure, I can do it. Sure, but that's not where my heart lies, Yeah. What we do is basically interpreting the artwork. In my view, the design, the concept is basically the artwork. The rest of it's how you make it. But you've got to take that integrity of design into the manufacture as well. That's why my method was different from most other people's, where I said, I will make this, because I don't know what I'm going to do, The design goes through a drawing phase. If it's something that needs to be drawn, I go through a drawing phase, and then I take it into the glass. But even making the glass, like I'm saying, acid etching for me, you're seeing the glass in the acid. Or the things that we've made using acid etching, there'll be a time in the future where you just can't get it. So these things will be looked upon in the future, and people say, how did they do that? How was that done? Because it has a unique quality you can't do with fusing, you can't do with sandblasting.
Well, John, look, this has been absolutely fascinating, and it's just wonderful to kind of touch base with you. And through technology, we can it feels like we're just down the pub. I don't have a drink in my hand, but it just feels it's just great to be able to kind of speak with you and share this with the wider community, because your work is fabulous, and the more people who see this, the better for the medium of glass. It's a celebration really of glass and what it can bring. So thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Oh, you're very welcome, and it's a great idea that you have. It sort of records who some of the people were, or some of the people are in our time.